Well, it was very saddening to hear of the suicide of Anthony Bourdain today. Um, Many people around the world, as we all know, have enjoyed his program for many years, Parts Unknown, in which he described the food around the world. But I wanted to mention today what my experience was when I heard this. It's obviously very sad to hear the death of an important person, or I don't know if an important person, I guess we're all important, but a notable person that has meant something to us in our lives. And the first thing that came into my mind today was a quote from Dr. Jung's Red Book. And I'm reading today just briefly from the Red Book, Liber Novus by C.G. Jung, the Reader's Edition. I'm reading from page 507 of the Reader's Edition. And in this section, which is called Scrutinies, Dr. Jung or Sonu Shamdasani put in the Red Book, the 7 Sermons to the Dead. The 7 Sermons to the Dead, which were given by Philemon, who was Dr. Jung's God image, the self. And here's the quote that came into my mind. "We have come back from Jerusalem, where we did not find what we sought." And I think that the reason that came into my mind was that obviously Anthony Bourdain was going around the world, and he was looking for something. We can see that with 2020 hindsight. And he didn't find it, sadly. And I think part of the reason that he didn't find it was that he was looking for something that he didn't understand, and it wasn't in the physical world. It's in the psychological world. And we can see the same thing in the suicide of Robin Williams as well, and particularly in the part he played in the movie Good Will Hunting. In that movie, he played a psychologist, and there's a very poignant scene in that movie when Matt Damon is the young man who's very flippant about the doctor's life, and Robin Williams responds to it very aggressively, nearly strangles Matt Damon, in fact, in the scene. And with 2020 hindsight, we can see that Robin Williams was really playing out something that was in his life, or it seems to me. And it's interesting that the movie is called Good Will Hunting, because the question is, what is he hunting for? And from a Jungian point of view, we're all hunting for wholeness. And where do we find that? We don't find it out in the physical world. It comes to us internally. And if it doesn't come to us, and if we don't look for it internally in our psyches, we may end up committing suicide, sadly. And that's my observation. And I thought it was sort of an interesting coincidence that on CNN this morning, when they were first announcing about Anthony Bourdain's death, it so happened that Neil deGrasse Tyson was there. And Neil deGrasse Tyson was a friend of Anthony Bourdain, but Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of the scientists in the world who has no conception of the inner world. He believes entirely in science, and science is his religion, and he has no concept of what's going on in the psyche, as evidenced by many of his programs and his statements online. And so I thought it was interesting that both he and the personalities that were on CNN this morning, they really have no clue about suicide and suicide prevention. And so what I wanted to do, because I've been doing the Archetype in Action website for many years, since 2010, it has come up that suicide was an issue. And in 2016, I wrote an essay on suicide, and I thought I would read it for you today. And let me see if I can give you a link to it. I'm not going to be able to quickly give you a link to it, so I'm going to pass on that one for now. I'll put the link in the replay so that you'll be able to see that. But I thought I would go ahead and read this essay, and I guess I could put it up on the screen for you. And so let me do that. This is a behind-the-scenes session, which I will be cutting later or editing later. So I'm not, let's see, can I find it here? Maybe. Okay, so I have it, and let me provide it for you here. And I'm sorry that flashes like that, so I'm going to take it down. That's not good. And I don't know why that's happening with my OBS, so I'll just go ahead and read it, and for what it's worth. So this is my essay entitled "The Meaning of Suicide," which I published in 2016. Let me begin by stating that I am not a professional psychologist, nor am I a professionally trained in suicide prevention, nor am I professionally trained in suicide prevention. In this essay, I will offer some of my subjective thoughts on the issue of suicide from personal experience of observing my own psyche. Psychologists always want to know whether you've had suicidal ideas. They call this suicide ideation. Based on my experiences, I would say that such ideas are fairly common among modern human beings. The question really is whether you ever take action on such an idea. When the crash of 2008 came, many people around the world lost all or most of their life savings. I was no exception. Losing the money you saved for 4 decades in one financial shock is definitely a stunning event for the psyche. I rate it right up there with the shocks of castration or a mastectomy because of breast cancer. It means that the personal image of yourself has been severely disrupted. Now, I can't say all the reasons someone kills themselves, but it seems to me that the loss of meaning in one's life is one of the major causes. We humans are meaning-making creatures, and when we cut off from a meaning we have relied on for decades, it can seem irretrievable. But the saving grace is that we are meaning-making creatures. This means that we can find new meaning in our lives, possibly entirely unrelated to the original meaning we relied upon. I'm going to shut this cell phone off so that I'm not interrupted. All right, so I'm going to go back and reread part of this. Now, I can't say the reason someone kills themselves, but it seems to me that the loss of meaning in one's life is one of the major causes. We humans are meaning-making creatures, and when we are cut off from a meaning we have relied upon for decades, it can seem irretrievable. But the saving grace is that we are meaning-making creatures. This means that we can find new meaning in our lives, possibly entirely unrelated to the original meaning we relied upon. And we can very possibly assign new meaning to very serious tragedies in our lives. Our psyches have that power. The excellent 2015 movie, Welcome to Happiness, provides an excellent example of what I am talking about, and I urge you to find it on Netflix or on demand. When things were really bad for my finances after the crash of 2008, my psyche was in a very dark place. At about the same time, a neighbor who had the reputation of a very successful and happy businessman did commit suicide. This obviously shocked many of us. I pondered his decision for a couple of weeks, but I concluded that I really wanted to see how everything comes out. I remember that during the Great Depression, many people suffered through very tough economic times. My grandfather lost his business, and my mother-in-law still talks about surviving on potatoes and love. Fortunately, she was young enough so she really didn't have to know how much her parents had to struggle during those years. And then there was World War II, which began on her 11th birthday. Pearl Harbor Day. Sorry, we're touching some of my complexes. Anxiety must have been palpable, but the meaning of her life became her family, and I'm still living into the meaning of my grandfather's life. My father told me before his death that when he was 7 years old, his family had to move out of their home in the dark of night. My aunt, who is still living, was a babe in arms at that time, and gratefully has no recollection of those times. Obviously, the family was foreclosed. This is why one part of my ongoing meanings and that of my grandfather is to fight back against the usurious banksters who crushed the economy while they reaped fraudulent excess riches by hiding their behavior from the public. In this century, the banks managed to get themselves paid double on all defaulted mortgages, and I've taken exception to that. Fortunately, my grandfather had his wits about him and made it possible for my father to enter the United States Naval Academy in 1942, thereby missing most of World War II, and my experiences with my father and his naval career gave me the gumption to become a lawyer, among many other hats I've worn. But my legal fight, which is now entering its 9th year, has had many colossal ups and downs, so I have needed more meaning in order to hold my psyche together. In my case, I have been blessed to find the writings of Dr. Carl G. Jung, and applying the meaning of his life to our 21st century politics has given me another meaning to my life. One other point worth mentioning is that if you have someone in your life who has returned from service in a war theater, please do pay attention to their state of mind. PTSD is real, and our military and national government pays practically no attention to mental health. Sadly, 20 to 22 military men and women commit suicide every day. In my case, I have an extremely mild form of PTSD based on a relatively mild experience in Vietnam. I was no hero and want no thanks for my service. But whenever I hear fireworks or a helicopter, I immediately flash back to experiences in Vietnam. I literally cannot stand to sit and watch the fireworks display on the 4th of July, and I left Vietnam 47 years ago. If I have those experiences, I can tell you that PTSD is real, and it is very likely that your service member is suffering in some way, perhaps silently and maybe in an unexpected way. It is important to get them to a therapist if they show any signs of problems. I have never gone myself, but I also have been studying the work of the leading psychologist of the 20th century for 31 years, so I am familiar with my psychic content. So yes, I do have a suicidal thought from time to time, but I feel strongly that as long as I have meaning in my life, including my wife, my children, my grandchildren, my fight against greed on Wall Street, and my writing and social networking, I will never act on those thoughts. If you don't know what to do to find meaning in your life, simply start doing something you like without any particular objective, even if it's nothing more than reading a book, going to a movie, or scribbling in a coloring book. Don't burn the midnight oil thinking about it. Gradually, your own unconscious psyche, gradually your own unconscious psyche, yes, I mean that also sends the suicidal ideation, will provide the answer. I'm going to read that sentence once again. Gradually, your own unconscious psyche, yes, I mean the one that sends the suicidal ideation, will provide the answer. Then you will have something to live for the rest of your natural life. All human beings were put here for a purpose. What's yours? Okay, so I wanted to cover that, and then there's another issue that I wanted to cover. Let me look at Miles's notes here. Miles, Anthony Bourdain is a famous documentary producer on CNN, and he was an executive chef who went around the world to very strange places in some cases, testing the food. And his program was on TV here in the United States every Sunday night at 9 p.m. He says, I wonder what Neil deGrasse Tyson has to say about love. It would be interesting how attractive people and women would find his analysis of it. No idea. You're not... Then he says, you are not only sticking around to see how it turns out, you are making a generous and purposeful gift to us out of it with this YouTube channel. Well, thank you very much. I'm honored. Okay, so one of the issues that I want to talk about is the issue of the fact that our psyche has two streams. Okay, it has a good stream and a shadow stream, a dark stream. And so that means that ideas can come up in our shadow which are not fit for public use, and they're not fit for your use. One of those is suicidal ideation. But as Dr. Jung explained, we have to test the spirits. In other words, if we have a spirit that's telling us that we should commit suicide, we definitely have to get suspicious of that one right away. And this is why it's so important for each one of us to make conscious moral choices and recognize that when we have a crazy idea coming up, it may be coming up from our shadow. And so now I want to read again from the Red Book. And this is from the beginning of Scrutinies. Let's see, where was I? Okay, so Dr. Jung was having some tough time going through this Red Book period. And in fact, he thought he might be psychotic. And so what I'm going to read for you is a stream of consciousness which is coming up from his dark side, I believe. Okay, from the side that might suggest that you might might commit suicide. And so if you're the least bit fragile in your psyche, I think you probably ought to discontinue watching this video at this point. I don't want to put dark thoughts in your head, but at the same time, if you think your mental health is strong, then I'd like for you to listen to it and read it. It is published in the Red Book by C.G. Jung. This is the reader's edition. I'm reading from page 461. And these are rather dark thoughts that Dr. Jung was having during his visioning in the Red Book. And the reason that I'm reading them is because I want you to be conscious of the types of thoughts that may be coming up in a person who is fragile, who might have PTSD, who might be a veteran who's having PTSD. And mind you, veterans have been exposed to some of the most horrific events of human life. And the things that we see in the field are really ugly. And this is why dear old Dad didn't say anything about the war when he came home. I remember even my father-in-law, who was on a merchant ship during World War II, but he was a Navy sailor, and he was assigned as the head of the gun battery, the single gun battery that was on this ship, and he never spoke of it. And it was only when I came into his life that I think I asked him at one point about his experience in World War II, and he could convey it to me as another veteran. But my mother-in-law and my wife said that they never knew anything about that before this, and it was good for him to open up and talk to me about it. So what I'm going to read is intended to show you some of the painful ideas that may come up in a person who is suffering, and keeping in mind that we're all suffering at some level. And if you look at the movie Good Will Hunting again, you can now, in the fullness of time with 20/20 hindsight, you can definitely see the suffering of Robin Williams in the part that he played. And I think he did win Best Supporting Actor for that role. And I don't recall. He was at least nominated, I'm sure. Also, the very name of the movie suggests that we're all hunting for something, Good Will Hunting. And so, I began this by reading this passage which came to my mind this morning. I'm going to read it one more time. So in a later part, this is 40 pages later, 45 pages later, when I heard of Anthony Bourdain's death this morning, what came to my mind was, we have come back from Jerusalem where we did not find what we sought. And that's a reference to a vision that Dr. Jung was having about ghosts. He was actually having a vision about ghosts, and a crowd came to his house, and this crowd of ghosts was there, and that's what they said to him. And that's on page 507 of the Reader's Edition. Let me look at this note. Chris Mack, this exact subject is the reason why I found my pathway towards psychology. I was an infantryman for 6 years and went to Afghanistan, southern Kandahar, from 2010 to 2011. Thank you for what you do, Skip. Okay, well, thank you for being here and saying that. It's very confirming to have a fellow veteran. You can see that I'm very touched. Okay, so I'm reading from the Red Book by C.G. Jung, page 461 of the Reader's Edition. And this is edition you can get at Barnes & Noble if you're lucky, or certainly on Amazon for about $25, but it only contains the words. It does not contain the images of the Red Book. And so here's what he's saying, and he's having a conversation with his soul. And this is an active imagination that's going on between him and his soul. And so his God image, his archetypal self. And so whenever there's a reference to I, he means his ego. And if he's talking about soul, he's talking about the archetype. Scrutinies. I resist. I cannot accept this hollow nothing that I am. What am I? What is my I? I always presuppose my I. Now it stands before me. I before my I. I speak now to you, my I. We are alone, and our being together threatens to become unbearably boring. We must do something, devise a pastime, for example. I could educate you. Let us begin with your main flaw, which strikes me first. You have no correct self-esteem. Have you no good qualities that you can be proud of? You believe that being capable is an art. But one can also learn such skills to some extent. Please do so. You find it difficult. Well, all beginnings are difficult. Soon you will be able to do it better. Do you doubt this? That is of no use. You must be able to do it, or else I cannot live with you. Ever since the God has arisen and spreads himself in whichever fiery heavens to do whatever he does, what exactly I do not know, we have depended upon one another. Therefore, you must think about improving, or else our life together will become wretched. So pull yourself together and value yourself. Don't you want to? Pitiful creature, I will torment you a bit if you do not make an effort. What are you moaning about? Perhaps the whip will help. Now that gets under your skin, doesn't it? Take that and that. What does it taste of? Of blood, presumably. Of the Middle Ages. Of the Middle Ages to the greater glory of God. This was a motto of the Jesuits, it says in a footnote. To the greater glory of God. Or do you want love, or what goes by that name? Or do you want love, or what goes by that name? One can also teach with love, if blows do not bear fruit. So should I love you, press you tenderly to myself? I truly believe you are yawning. How now? You want to speak? But I won't let you. Otherwise, in the end, you will claim that you are my soul. But my soul is with the fireworm, with the son of the frog who has flown to the heavens above, to the upper sources. Do I know what he is doing there? But you are not my soul. You are my bare, empty nothing. I, this disagreeable being, whom one cannot even deny the right to consider itself worthless. One could despair over you. Your sensitivity and desirousness exceed any reasonable measure, and I should live with you, of all people. I must, since the strange misfortune occurred that gave me a son and took him away. I regret that I must speak such truths to you. Yes, you are laughably sensitive, self-righteous, unruly, mistrustful, pessimistic, cowardly, dishonest with yourself, venomous, vengeful. One can hardly speak about your childish pride, your craving for power, your desire for esteem, your laughable ambition, your thirst for fame without feeling sick. The play acting and pomposity become you badly, and you abuse them to the best of your ability. Do you believe that it is a pleasure rather than an honor? Do you believe that it is a pleasure rather than a horror to live together with you? No, 3 times no. But I promise you that I will tighten the vice around you and slowly pull off your skin. I will give you the chance to be flayed. You of all people wanted to tell other people what to do? Come here. I will stitch a cloth of new skin onto you so that you can feel its effect. You want to complain about others and that one has done an injustice to you, not understood you, misinterpreted you, hurt your feelings, ignored you, not recognized you, falsely accused you, and what else? Do you see your vanity in this? Your eternally ridiculous vanity? You complain that the torment has not yet come to an end. No, it's a question. You complain that the torment has not yet come to an end? Let me tell you, it has only just begun. You have no patience and no seriousness. Only when it concerns your pleasure do you praise your patience. I will double the torment so that you learn patience. You find the pain unbearable, but there are other things that hurt even more, and you can inflict them on others with the greatest naivety and absolve yourself all knowingly, and absolve yourself all unknowingly. But you will learn silence. For this I will pull out your tongue, with which you have ridiculed, blasphemed, and even worse, joked. I will pin all your unjust and depraved words one by one to your body with needles, so that you can feel how evil words stab. Do you admit that you also derive pleasure from this? Do you admit that you also derive pleasure from this torment? I will increase this pleasure until you vomit with joy, so that you know what taking pleasure in self-torment means. You rise against me, I am screwing the vice tighter. That's all. I will break your bones until there is no longer a trace of hardness there. For I want to get along with you. I must, damn you. You are me. You are my I, which I must carry around with me to the grave. Do you think that I want to have such foolishness around me all my life? If you were not my I would have torn you to pieces long ago. But I am damned to haul you through a purgatory so that you too will become somewhat acceptable. You call on God for help? The dear old God has died, and it is good that way. Otherwise, he would have had pity on your repentant sinfulness and spared me the execution by granting mercy. You must know that neither a God of love nor a loving God has yet arisen, but instead a worm of fire crawled up, a magnificent, frightful entity that lets fire rain on the earth, producing lamentations. So cry to the God, I will burn you with fire for the forgiveness of your sins. Coil yourself and sweat blood. You have needed this cure for a long time. Yes, others always do wrong. And you? You are the innocent, the correct. You must defend your good right, and you have a good, loving God on your side, who always forgives sins with pity. Others must reach insight, not you, since you have a monopoly on all insight from the start and are always convinced that you are right. And so cry really loudly to your dear God. He will hear you and let fire fall on you. Have you not noticed that your God has become a fiery worm with a flat skull that crawls red hot on the earth? This is really cheery. Moving on. You wanted to be superior? How laughable. You were and are inferior. Who are you then? Scum that disgusts me. Are you perhaps somewhat powerless? I place you in a corner where you can remain lying until you come to your senses again. If you no longer feel anything, the procedure is of no use. After all, we must proceed skillfully. It really says a lot about you that one needs such barbaric means for your amendment. Your progress since the early Middle Ages appears to be minuscule. Did you feel dejected today, inferior, debased? Shall I tell you why? Your inordinate ambition is boundless. Your grounds are not focused on the good of the matter, but on your vanity. You do not work for humanity, but for your self-interest. You do not strive for the completion of the thing, but for the general recognition and safeguarding of your own advantage. I want to honor you with a prickly crown of iron. It has teeth inside that bore themselves into your flesh. And now we come to the vile swindle that you pursue with your cleverness. You speak skillfully and abuse your capability and discolor, tone down, strengthen, apportion light and shade, and loudly proclaim your honorableness and upright good faith. You exploit the good faith of others. You gloatingly catch them in your snares and speak of your benevolent superiority and the prize that you are for others. You play at modesty and do not mention your merit in the certain hope that someone else will do it for you. You are disappointed and hurt if this doesn't happen. You preach hypocritical composure, but when it really matters, are you calm? No, you lie. You consume yourself in rage, and your tongue speaks cold daggers, and you dream of revenge. You are gloating and resentful. You begrudge the other the sunshine, since you would like to assign it to those whom you favor, because they favor you. You are envious of all well-being around you, and you impertinently assert the opposite. Inside yourself, you think unsparingly and coarsely. Inside yourself, you think unsparingly and coarsely. Inside yourself, you think unsparingly and coarsely only what always suits you, and with this you feel yourself above humanity and not in the least responsible. But you are responsible to humanity in everything that you think, feel, and do. Do not pretend there is a difference between thinking and doing. You rely only on your undeserved advantage, not to be compelled to say or do what you think and feel. But you are shameless in everything where no one sees you. If another said that to you, you would be mortally offended, despite knowing that it is true. You want to reproach others for their failings, so that they better themselves? Yes, confess. You have bettered yourself. From where do you get the right to have opinions of others? What is your opinion about yourself? And what are the good grounds that support it? Your grounds are webs of lies covering a dirty corner. You judge others and charge them with what they should do. You do this because you have no order within yourself, because you are unclean. And then, how do you really think? It appears to me that you even think with men, regardless of their human dignity. You dare think by means of them and use them as figures on your stage, as if they were how you conceive them. Have you ever considered that you thus commit a shameful act of power, as bad as that for which you condemn others, namely that they love their fellow men as they claim, but in reality exploit them to their own ends? Your sin flourishes in seclusion, but it is no less great, remorseless, and coarse. What is concealed in you I will drag out into the light, shameless one. I will crush your superiority under my feet. Do not speak to me about your love. What you call love oozes with self-interest and desirousness. But you speak about it with great words, and the greater your words are, the more pathetic your so-called love is. Never speak to me of your love, but keep your mouth shut. It lies. Everybody having fun so far? Okay, a little more here. Okay, I'm on page 466 of the Reader's Edition. I want you to speak about your shame, and that instead of speaking great words, you utter a discordant clamor before those whose respect you wanted to exact. You deserve mockery, not respect. I will burn out of you the contents of which you are so proud, so that you will become empty like a poured-out vessel. You should be proud of nothing more than your emptiness and wretchedness. You should be a vessel of life, so kill your idols. Freedom does not belong to you, but form, not power, but suffering and conceiving. You should make a virtue out of your self-contempt, which I will spread out before men like a carpet. They should walk over it with dirty feet, and you should see it, and you should see to it that you are dirtier than all the feet that step on you. If I tame you, beast, I give others the opportunity to tame their beasts. The taming begins with you, my I, nowhere else. Not that you, stupid brother I, had been particularly wild. There are some who are wilder, but I must whip you until you endure the wildness of others. Then I can live with you. If someone does you wrong, I will torment you to death until you have forgiven the wrongful suffering. Until you have forgiven the wrong suffered, yet not just by paying lip service, but also in your heavy heart with its heinous sensitivity. Your sensitivity is your particular form of violence. Therefore listen, brother in my solitude. I have prepared every kind of torture for you, if it should ever occur to you again to be sensitive. You should feel inferior. You should be able to bear the fact that one calls your purity dirty, and that one desires your dirtiness, that one praises your wastefulness as miserliness, and your greed as a virtue. Fill your beaker with the bitter drink of subjugation, since you are not your soul. Your soul is with the fiery God who flamed up to the roof of the heavens. Should you still be sensitive? I notice that you are forging secret plans for revenge, plotting deceitful tricks, but you are an idiot. You cannot take revenge on fate. Childish one, you probably even want to lash the sea, build better bridges instead. That is a better way to squander your wit. You want to be understood? That's all we needed. Understand yourself, and you will be sufficiently understood. You will have quite enough work in hand with that. Mother's little dears want to be understood. Understand yourself. That is the best protection against sensitivity and satisfies your childish longing to be understood. I suppose you want to turn others into slaves of your desirousness again, but you know that I must live with you and that I will no longer tolerate such abject plaintiveness. Okay, so there's a little bit of good news here. The next paragraph on page 467, or the next segment. After I had spoken these words and many more angry words to my eye, I noticed that I began to bear being alone with myself, but the touchiness still stirred in me frequently, and I had to lash myself just as often. And I did this until even the pleasure in self-torment faded. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. And then his soul comes in, but there's a footnote here. The footnote is, Jung later described the self-criticism depicted in this opening section as as the confrontation with the shadow. In 1934, he wrote, Whoever looks into the mirror of the water will see first of all his own image. Whoever goes to himself risks a confrontation with himself. The mirror does not flatter. It faithfully shows whatever looks into it, namely the face we never show to the world because we cover it with the persona, the mask of the actor. But the mirror lies behind the mask and shows the true face. This confrontation is the first test of courage on the inner way, a test sufficient to frighten off most people, for the meeting with ourselves belongs to the more unpleasant things that can be avoided as long as one can project everything negative into the environment. But if we are able to see our own shadow and can bear knowing about it, then a small part of the problem has already been solved. We have at least brought up the personal unconscious. And that footnote is from an essay called On the Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious from Collected Works, Volume 9, paragraphs 43 and 44. So, that was a cheery reading. Yeah, it's like a Dean Martin roast with Don Rickles. Yep, absolutely, except it's what we have to do to ourselves, unfortunately. Okay, well, now that I've given you that cheery set of thoughts, those are my thoughts on the types of things that can come up in the suicide ideation stream. And if you've paid attention, whether or not you can apply any of that to yourself, and I hope you can't, you must know that people who commit suicide do have thoughts like that. And so it's important to pay attention to people's psychological well-being. And to our shame in the United States, we've really done away with proper mental health. Instead, we want to drug it, which isn't a solution and which leads to the opioid epidemic that we're having throughout the country. And so that's not really a solution. We need to solve these problems at depth. And so, if you have a veteran who's returned from war, I urge you to pay attention to their well-being. And if they start to get moody, for whatever reason, I urge you to help them get some mental health help, because most health insurance plans do allow you to have at least maybe $1,000 worth of consultations with a mental health professional. And so it is covered, or get them into the Veterans Administration so that they can be evaluated. I'm not saying that the Veterans Administration has great mental health services. Maybe I haven't evaluated them and I wouldn't know. But with 20 to 22 veterans committing suicide every day, it's obvious that we need some attention to this. And so that's why I'm trying to make you aware of this, because as intense as that reading was just now, that's how intense what can be going on in someone's psyche is. And you can see why, Honestly, probably most of us have had some or all of those thoughts come through our head at one time or another. They probably sound familiar. And if that's the case, then you know the truth of what I'm saying. I certainly do agree. As I read this, I do agree that these are things that have come up through my shadow side stream. And what's significant in Dr. Jung's approach is that we have both shadow side and light side, dark side and light side, coming through from our unconscious. And it's our ego that needs to test these spirits and decide what's right to bring into conscious life and what should better be left unconscious. And as going back to my essay in 2008, when I was having that suicidal ideation, my answer to it, and I didn't at the time know whether it was a successful answer or not, was I would simply say, perish that thought. I'd say that to myself, and that seemed to control that thought for me. And so now, as I understand it better from a Jungian point of view, I understand that we can test the spirits and we can challenge them morally and control what happens to us. So anyway, I urge you to think about these issues and think about them vis-a-vis the people around you. And obviously, with the opioid epidemic, we see in the United States that many people are choosing to commit suicide by opioids. And we've had two experiences in my close relationship in the last year. My brother-in-law's son died from an opioid overdose, and just a week and a half ago, or 2 weeks ago, a close friend's son died. And while the cause of death isn't well known, he was 31 years old, and we might surmise that opioids may have been involved. And so these things are happening very close to me, and if they're happening close to me, they may be happening close to you as well. I remember during the Vietnam era, when caskets started to show up in every little town in America, then everybody had to pay attention to the Vietnam War and what we were doing there. And that's the only thing that ended it. Otherwise, the neocons who want molten war would have kept it going indefinitely, as they have done in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so we have to evaluate what it is we're doing and what we think we're accomplishing in these places. And it's not an issue of bad training. I know that American military will train people properly when they're training other armies, for example. And yet something else is wrong, and that's clearly the case. And we have to evaluate whether we need molten war. Miles says, yes, suicide is not reported in the daily news, and when we hear the true statistics, it is shocking. It is up there with motor vehicle deaths, which do get more publicity for some reason. We don't want to admit suicide, and yet And yet it's happening. And so, to the credit of Anthony Bourdain's family, they allowed CNN to talk about the cause of death immediately after his death. And that is to their credit, because suicide prevention is a topic that we have to talk about around the world. And so, anyway, I think I've done enough of this homily. So I'm going to stop for today. One piece of notice, though, the advanced reading group has changed its day of the week from Thursday to Tuesday. And the reason for that is that the people who maintain the facility in which I live were doing all kinds of noisy things outside my window every Thursday. So as a result, we'll run the advanced reading group, in which we're discussing Ion on Tuesdays at 1:30 p.m. And you can get access to the replays of those seminar sessions, which are video conference sessions. You can get access to the replay by contacting me, and I'll very briefly give you my contact information here so that you can contact me if you're interested in being included in the advanced reading group. Next Tuesday, we will be discussing Chapter 2, which is about the shadow. Let's see, Opiami 693 says, a week ago I watched a bunch of Anthony's recent shows. He seemed upbeat and happy, speaking also lovingly about his young daughter. Something's not right about this. Well, obviously, Anthony was in great pain at depth, which is what we can see about Robin Williams, too. I mean, obviously, Robin Williams gave great joy to many of us through his comedy over the years. And you know, with 2020 hindsight, we can look at Good Will Hunting and actually see the pain that he was suffering, and but only with 2020 hindsight. At the time, we might have thought he was acting, but actually he was living his pain in that part. And now, you know, I've traveled all over the world too, like Anthony Bourdain, and I have not found what I sought there. I am starting to understand wholeness by looking within and by doing this YouTube channel. But wholeness comes from here, from the heart. It doesn't come from somebody else giving it to us. That's the issue. We have to examine ourselves and search for our own meaning. And so I urge to anyone who's listening to this that having meaning in your life is a critical element to avoiding it. And meaning doesn't have to be some great meaning. Nobody has to, you know, I don't think the Kennedy Center or the RFK Stadium in Washington have helped John Kennedy or Robert Kennedy at all, or the Martin Luther King Monument in Washington. That didn't help Martin Luther King. And so you don't have to have a monument built to the meaning of your life. I mean, those men had meaning in their life throughout their lives. And so each one of us has to find meaning. And the meaning can be as simple as being kind to someone you meet on the street, a smile. It can be taking care of the elderly, or, you know, loving your spouse or your children or whatever it is. So each of us has our own meaning, but we should each figure out what that meaning is. We each have to find what piece we can put into the great mosaic of human life over the centuries. And keep in mind that we represent the meaning of life. If you ask the meaning of life, I can tell you that the fact that you're sitting here watching this means that you are descended from single-cell organisms and going all the way back 3.5 billion years. And so the question is, what will you do with that precious human life, and what will be the meaning that you put into human life? That's the question. And I guess that's my homily. Okay, I will. I'm going to put this out publicly shortly, so it will be available in replay. And I urge you to go back to the beginning of it, especially if you came in it toward the end. It got pretty gloomy at the end, but I urge you to go back to the beginning and at least listen to my early comments and my reading of my essay, The Meaning of Suicide. Thank you for joining me today. Goodbye.